Croeso, Cymru! Welcome to Wales! This is the Great Orme, a giant limestone peninsula jutting out into the Irish Sea. And it may well be the most important rock in all of British history. This rock, this stone, starts the beginning of a story, not just for Britain, but of Europe, which takes us through to the present day. Together with the Little Orme, over here on our right, they were produced during the Carboniferous period, almost 350 million years ago. It was at this time when trees first evolved on land. Where we are now standing would have been a tropical area full of aquatic life, the shells of which would go on to form this limestone rock. Around 5,000 years ago, at least, brilliantly clever people discovered ways to extract copper metal from this rock. These people were likely considered the first magicians, being able to produce something so new and mysterious. Over a period of time greater than 1,000 years, 2,000 tons of copper was mined here and sent all across Europe, allowing the creation of more sophisticated tools and weapons, and ultimately leading to the creation of what we now recognise as the first great civilizations. Copper ore can be found throughout this structure, and the mines begin on top of the Orme in its very centre. The system of mining would have been horrendous for those involved, and tells us a lot about the society in which these people lived. Working in absolute darkness with stone tools, little room to move and little air, the work would have been backbreaking. We can see from the size of the tunnels that children must have been involved, and it's hard to see how anyone could have kept up this type of work for long. To me, the conditions can only mean slavery or some form of it was in operation in Britain 5,000 years ago. Also, proving power structures were in place, the type of which seems so clear at Lordenshaw. We also know from this site just how developed Britain and Europe were 5,000 years ago. This copper was sent, bought and sold right across the continent. It was combined with Cornish tin to create bronze in strategic locations which could then be further bought and sold. These were not simple cavemen and women. The ingenuity, skill and planning involved shows us society was highly organised. There are a couple of final points to make. Firstly, this site is fantastic evidence of how far sea levels have changed since the last ice age. 12,000 years ago, the sea was about 70 metres lower than it is today. When humans first arrived here after the last ice age, sea level was rising much quicker than it is today, increasing by 40 metres over 4,000 years. When mining begins here, the sea was around 10 metres lower than today. Much of the archaeological evidence we have then comes from around the caves at and below today's sea level, with fascinating discoveries of human remains and artefacts. It should make us question just how much of the human story exists lost underwater. Finally then, it is impossible to overstate the importance of this site, not only to the development of Europe, but in helping us see how humans adapted the landscape as well as adapting to it. This is what humanities is all about. This is Snowdonia National Park. What I love about this is it's such a great example of a glacial valley. Straight ahead you can see the mountains and you can see the direction the glacier would have moved. Each of these hills and mounds that we can see in front of us is the moraine, the glacial till, the stone and the rocks that would have been left behind. And you can see just how far along in the distance that glacier would have moved. Now we're right in the middle of another glacial valley, and this lake here is all that is left. The glacier would have moved in and around, and obviously now those glaciers are long gone, but the lake is the remainder of that glacial movement. And this is why I love Wales. It's beautiful. You can see over in the distance there again the mountains. You can see the high U-shaped sides of the valley and how the glacier would have moved its way through and took away the stone with force all the way towards the lake, which is all that is left behind. Beddgelert, once voted one of the most beautiful villages in the UK, and this is where my great grandparents are buried. So the famous story of Beddgelert is about the dog of Prince Llewellyn. Prince Llewellyn returned home, found his baby missing, found his dog covered in blood. So he took his dog outside and killed it. And after he'd killed it, he heard his baby crying. He walked over to the baby and he found a wolf, dead, killed by his dog and his baby. And so his dog had saved his baby's life, and he'd acted too early, killing his dog, and he regretted it. And so he buried his dog, and the story is that they named the place after the dog Gelert. But it's a made-up story for tourists, but it's still quite nice.
No, you don't know what's truth in somewhere on the house.
We're in Caernarfon. And just a reminder that stone is important to us not only for the stone that we find naturally in the ground, the story that it tells of its geology and its formation, but again, how humans have used that stone and the relics they've left behind, and what we learn about the human story from that. This is the best castle in the United Kingdom. If you look behind me over here, it's about 950 years old, and it was built to, well, the original one, 950 years old, built to subjugate the Welsh. Traditional style. You've got the crenellations at the top, the not quite circular towers, showing that it really is quite old, and the traditional arrow slits. So this was built for defensive purposes, and it was built by the King of England so that he could control the entire north of Wales. It also meant that from here he could control the Irish Sea and eventually, hopefully, Ireland. So it's really beautiful, it's well preserved, it's where the Prince of Wales still comes as his seat of power to represent the British Crown. And this is it, Caernarfon Castle.